Good evening and welcome to the Rochester Community Schools Board of Education special meeting called to order at 6:03. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This Board of Education special meeting has been called for board members to discuss the superintendent search process. During this meeting, the board will move into closed session to hear information about the superintendent applications that have been received. Because the names of applicants only become public when an applicant accepts an interview, tonight, when we return from closed session, we will only be referencing applicants by number, and we must be careful to not disclose any information that would identify the candidate. We will also be discussing questions, and those too will only be referenced by number, as we'd like to see how the candidates answer without having time to prepare ahead of time. The last part of our discussion will involve the format for our future interviews. As a reminder, this is a meeting of the Board of Education in public and is not a public community meeting. However, there is a time for public participation during the meeting. General public comment will be heard under Agenda Item 9. If you wish to speak tonight and have not already filled out a yellow card, they're located on the table near the entrance to the media center. Once you've completed the card, please hand it to a safe ed officer in a yellow shirt. Please note that the cards must be completed prior to speaking. I'll call the names of those who have a card that I have a card for during public comment. At this time, for roll call, all board members are present, with the exception of Jason Blake, who will be here momentarily. In fact, here he is. At this time, then, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Trustee Annis. Is there support? From Trustee Gupta. Is there any discussion on this? All of those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That's a 7-0 vote, and the agenda is approved. Moving on to Agenda Item 4. This is where we will move into closed session. Is there a motion to move to closed session to review superintendent applications? Moved by Trustee Gupta. Is there support? Trustee Blake. Any discussion on this? All right, all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That's a 7-0 vote. The motion passes, and we are moving into closed session at 6:06 p.m. When we are finished, we'll come back out here, we'll return to open session, and then we will continue with the rest of our meeting. Well, we are returning to open session, so I need a motion to do so at 7:47. Moved by, did I see Trustee Alspa? Is there support for that to return to open session from Trustee Gupta? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's a 7-0 vote, and we are back in open session at 7:47. All right, so we are moving on to our agenda item 6, which is our candidate selection, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy from Ray & Associates to explain the next steps to us.
Okay, thank you. So Sheila is now going to pass out the packet with the scoring matrix. You will note your name is written down on the bottom left corner, and I'll give you some explanation as soon as you get it. But I'm loud enough. All right, everybody have theirs? Okay, so all of the numbers at the top of the page that look like fractions, those numbers represent the candidates. Remember, we are not discussing candidates by name. The numbers down at the bottom left correspond with those at the top, so you will see the 1 indicates candidate 1, the 2 indicates candidate 2, and so on. Each of those pairings of numbers compare one candidate to the other. As an example, you will see the 1 over the 2. So you have to figure out, do you like candidate 1 better than candidate 2? And you circle the number that you prefer. You work left to right, do the 1 over 2, 1 over 3, 1 over 4, etc. And then you go down to the column that starts with the 2 and work your way left to right. You must circle one from each pair or it messes up the process. So circle the one that you prefer best. And then when you're done, you can raise your hand, you can bring them to us, whatever you want to do, and then we'll ask you to take a quick break so I can tally them. Do nothing at the bottom. I will take care of that when I get it back. Correct, all of them at the top. Okay, everybody should have their sheet back in front of them. So I'm gonna, if you see on the right-hand side, the total column, and then the ranking column, I'm gonna give you the numbers to put in there. So for candidate 1, that candidate had a total of 13 and ranked 5th. The next one is candidate 2, had a total of 38 and ranked 1st. Candidate 3 had a total of 11 and ranked 6th. The next one is candidate 4, had a total of 20 and ranked 4th. The next one is candidate 5, had a total of 24 and ranked 3rd. The next one is candidate 6, had a total of 7 and ranked 7th. And then candidate 7 had a total of 34 and ranked 2nd. So, now it's time for discussion. Obviously, there's a clear break. There's several clear breaks. It might be best to start the conversation with working from the bottom up, perhaps, if everybody is in agreement that candidate 6, who ranked 7th, does not move forward, we can go that way. Am I getting a unanimous?
I think we're in agreement with that.
Yes. Unanimous head shake? Okay, so that's good. All right, the next one up from that.
I'm sorry, before we go on, just
Yep.
a reminder to all the board members that whatever you write on your matrix is going in the board minutes, so just keep that in mind. Thank you.
So if we go up from there, candidate number 3 had a total of 11 and ranked 6th.
Agreed.
He said them.
You did say that?
He said them. Everybody in agreement? Okay. The next one was candidate 1, who had a total of 13 and ranked 5th.
I think that's really the line right there. I think after you go over that line, you know, kind of get much closer together. So to me, I think that's a good criteria because it's based on numbers. That's really where the divide happens. I'm not familiar with that one as well.
I tend to agree. I had hoped to have 5, but I think there's a pretty clear delineation there. So, board colleagues, what do you feel?
I agree with you too. That's where I see the natural break as well.
Okay. So is the board in agreement that candidate 2, who ranked 1st, moves forward to a first-round interview?
Yes.
Are we in agreement that candidate 4, who had a score of 20 and ranked 4th, moves forward for a first-round interview?
Yes.
I think we're just going to make a motion that,
Okay.
to invite candidates 2, 4, 5, and 7 for a first-round interview. Is there a motion motion for that from trustee Lekui, and then support from trustee Annis? Is there any discussion on that? I think we kind of all sort of came to that under consensus. Is there any comment from anyone present? Okay. All those in favor of inviting candidates 2, 4, 5, and 7 for the first round interview, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That's a 7-0 vote, and so those 4 candidates would be asked to interview for the first round.
Okay. So then let me kind of jump around, since we have determined,
Hold on just one second. So we do have an agenda.
oh, that's right.
So agenda
I have my own
item,
agenda. No.
agenda item 7 is our interview question
Okay.
selection.
All right, we'll do it your way. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda are the interview questions. You should all have a copy of the questions in front of you. Again, those were put together. You will see a red number in parentheses at the end of each question. That identifies the number of board members that selected that question. They go from 3 to 6, I think. We want to, I guess, have to approve the questions. We don't want to read the questions out loud. If someone has a change of wording, I know there was one question that a suggestion was added. Perhaps question 4, we would just need a yes or no on whether we wanted to add that last part. But again, we don't want to read the questions out loud. We don't want prospective candidates to hear that information.
So I guess first I would just say, let's address maybe that one on question number 4, as to whether the highlighted language is acceptable as an addition to that question. Is there any issue with that from anyone? So I think we're good with adding that.
Okay. So I don't know if you want to go down question by question or how you want to do it, or just say, leave it up to you.
Has everyone had a chance to go through it? And then I guess I would just say if there's anyone who feels that we're missing something important for this first round, keeping in mind we do have a second round of interviews, so we can ask other questions. So if you just take a look, and I can call on you if you have. Trustee Annis?
Just for clarification, so every question proposed is within the amount of time that we need, like,
In theory,
in theory?
there's 14, I thought there was 15. There's 14 questions, including the last one. Obviously, do you have any questions for us? That gives them about 3.5 minutes per question.
Okay. On average, what do you see in terms of
Some
question-
people are wordy. It depends on how you're going to do it. There's boards that give a little reminder that say, we're only on question X and we have this much time left. Or you could go so far as to say you have 3 minutes per question. We strongly encourage each candidate to be asked the same questions. So as an example, if you interview the first person and the first person runs out of time at whatever point, we like to keep it even and equitable and have you stop at that same point with everybody. But
Well, I'm all for, one, that we keep telling the candidate that we have 45 minutes and reminding them if they are running behind on that. I'm not sure how I feel, though, about not asking the questions if the first candidate happens to be super wordy and only gets through 8 questions. So, Trustee LeCouey.
What if we timed them with 3-minute timer per question?
And
To
just-
see if they can be concise and get right to the point and say it within that 3-minute time period?
I hear trustee, that actually, I will say that was not what I was saying. I was saying more the 45 minutes and, let them manage it to a degree. But I know Trustee Weaver had a thought there.
Yeah, so President Bill, I think I'm more in line with you. I think the 45 minutes, time management's part of what we're assessing. So from a question standpoint, I think we just ask as many questions as we get through. I think from an HR standpoint, as long as that standard's in place and it's the time that dictates when we stop, not arbitrarily cutting someone off and not allowing them to it, we would run into no HR issues for how we conduct the interview. My only question would be, do we really need 14 questions? It just seems like a lot of questions.
that's entirely up to
To
you.
me, I think if we kind of go through the headers, if almost you have one question under each header, that gets you down to 9 questions versus 14. Again, just going through an interview process and hiring, 14 questions is a lot of questions. So I would like, maybe, if we're worried about time at all, look at reducing the number of questions. Again, if we want one under each header, I think that gets us to 9 versus 14 questions.
Except Trustee Blake.
Not to make it more difficult to add questions, but I just do want to say this. I was at the PAC meeting this last week, and they strongly all barraged me that they submitted a question that they really think that we ought to submit, and it's not on here. So I said I would bring that back to the board and tell you that they feel strongly about their question.
What's the question?
Well,
you can't say
it's-
it. I'm sorry.
It was 21 in the original.
Is that a question that you could perhaps put in the second round?
I just want them to know that I brought this back and that we're not forgetting them.
I was going to just make a comment based on trustee Weaver's thought of reducing the number of questions. I think in some of these, it may be difficult to remove 2 questions out of a section, only because I think they were important. Like, when you look at them, you can see that 5, 6 of us actually selected those questions, versus some of the others, were only 3.
I would just say, again, from a typical interview standpoint, the headers would be you're assessing that specific thing. I would just suggest we take anywhere there is multiple, just take whichever one had the highest. I do think hitting all the categories is, in my opinion, is more critical than multiple questions under one category. And again, just 14 questions seems like a lot. But I would say whatever has the highest under each category, just take that, make it straight and forward from that
I guess I
standpoint.
would argue only in that some of the original categories didn't even make it onto the list because there weren't enough. So, I mean, if we look at, I guess if we would like to reduce some, if you look at the questions 1 and 2, on that, would we want to drop question 1?
I mean, in my opinion, only 3 people selected it. I would say yes. If only 3 out of 7.
I'm kind of looking for other people to nod their heads that, yes, they're okay dropping 1.
Yes.
Trustee Gupta?
I'm okay with that too. But one thought I had is, could we just deprioritize anything with the 3 next to it? So if we ask them toward the end. So if we still have time, we can ask those. If we don't have time, we don't ask those.
We have to ask everyone.
Well, I mean, we're going to try to set everybody up for success on the front end by
Well, that's
telling them
true.
their time.
There are three questions that had only 3 votes, and we could list those last. Trustee Alspa?
My only concern with that is you are ruling out total categories then. So I'm not opposed to question number 1 being dropped because there's still something underneath that competency. But the other 2 that are ranked only 3 people are the only one under that competency.
I guess I just want to point out that we've already eliminated some categories, though. So some of them didn't make it over here at all.
That's correct. We've already eliminated categories, so.
But I guess to that point, though, this is saying enough people did want these categories theoretically on the interview schedule. So I agree. I would want to go through and make sure that there's at least 1 question under each one of these headers, because again, it's saying the header made it because enough people supported it.
All right, well, then why don't we look at, like, this first one where there were only, there's 2 questions in that category, and the first one only had 3. Are we okay removing that one?
I would just like to say,
Trustee Ennis?
I agree with trustee Gupta's suggestion that we want to set people up to be successful in answering all of these. So if we took the ones that ranked 3 in some of these categories and put them at the end, and we found that we had time, we could circle back and say, we have additional questions in this area, whatever.
Trustee Alspa?
Just for clarification, I think what trustee Annis is suggesting would be that not everybody would get the same questions then. So if somebody is more verbose, they wouldn't get to the, I want to say bonus round, low priority, that sounds like an oxymoron, but they wouldn't get to the extra questions. So then I would be concerned that we're doing an apples and oranges interview.
But that's what we had talked about initially, was that we would have 45 minutes, and their job was to manage the time. We're just putting our most important, the questions we are most interested in having the answers to up front. Kathy?
I have a suggestion. You had originally allowed 2 days, 3 interviews per day, anticipating 6 candidates. What happens if you do 2 interviews the first day, 2 interviews the second day, but give them a little bit more than 45 minutes? That's just a thought.
Trustee Lakouie?
I'm going to maybe be the lone person on the board that still thinks that it's valuable, and you can still assess time management if you just limit each question to 3 minutes, because you can see if a person can prioritize in their mind what's the most important stuff to get out first and see how far they can get within that 3 minutes, and then they're cut off. And then they have time to get through more questions, which might cover more ground of experience. But in any case, if we go to the other approach where we just have 45 minutes and we just see what they do with that time, I actually prefer the idea of taking the questions that have the most people vote for them and putting those in front, putting the ones with the least in back. Because even when it comes to some of these categories, I don't know, some of the questions really could overlap categories. And I found myself personally, when I was looking at the questions, preferring questions within certain categories over others anyways. So that's what I would recommend.
Trustee Weaver, did you have something?
I would just say, I think I agree with the premise where you're at, and that's why I think partly the 14 are just a lot of questions, there's some overlap, so to me, I think what we just really want to get out of it is just the quality answer. So again, either the prioritizing, because again, as long as they are all in the same order, again, we're still good from an HR standpoint, whether we reduce some of them, just because again, it's just a lot of questions, I would be good with either of those options.
Okay, so, and maybe we can do a combination of the two. When we look at the first page, do we need question 1?
No,
Okay, so,
get rid of it.
so I'm going to say we're at least removing 1 question with question 1. I also agree with prioritizing. And I was going to look to see, so on page 3, where we have 3 questions under 1 section, do we want question 7? That was the least of those requested, although it does have 4 people did choose it.
I would say no.
Trustee Alspa?
Would that leave questions 6 and 8, and we're
Yes.
dropping 7? Okay, I'd be okay.
Okay, is everyone okay with dropping 7?
I mean, if you all want to do that, I think it's a good question, but it only got 4, so let's go with the numbers.
I agree, it's a good question too, but
I-
I'm fine dropping it.
But it's also something we could ask in the second round.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we could do that.
it's a question we could ask in the second
Let's-
round, okay.
yeah.
So then I'm proposing that we move forward with the 12 that are here, but that we prioritize them based on the number of people who had requested the question, and that we go with and personally, that we stick with the 45 minutes per interview.
And doing all 4 in one day.
I don't think we do all 4 in one day, but when we get to the next section, we can decide if we want to do 3 in one day and 1 on the second day, if we want to do 2 and 2, just because we'll have a meeting on that second day afterwards, to determine who we want to move to the next round, so. Okay, so then,
President Budell, I'm going to be a little difficult here. I do think we should start with the leadership question and then prioritize after that. Just if you read that first question that has the highest, it just has kind of got a weird flow to it from a truly like running the actual interview. So I think if we start with leadership and then prioritize after that, it
That's
just will
fine.
make the interview flow a little better.
yep,
agree.
I'm good with that. I guess my question would be, are you okay with either Ray and Associates picking the order of the questions so that they can look at the flow, or choosing someone on the board to identify the order of the questions? Trustee Alsbach?
I think we hired them for their expertise so they can design the questions based on our input, the flow of them.
I agree, so.
I would
Everyone
agree.
okay with that? Okay. So with that then, I guess what I would say is that we would utilize the questions that were identified minus question 1 and question 7. And then, I guess if we can vote on this just to have that identified. So is there a motion to utilize the questions as identified by Ray and Associates, except for the removal of question 1 and 7? Moved by trustee Weaver, support by trustee Alsbach. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's a 7-0 vote, so we're moving along here. So the next is Agenda Item 8. It's a discussion around several items we need to decide on as a board for the upcoming interview rounds, and I will turn this back over to you, Kathy.
So before we finish the interview questions, a lot of boards ask the questions what we call round robin style, where the president starts, the president asks the first question, the last question, and then we circle through as the board in agreement on that. That way everybody has an opportunity to ask at least one, if not 2 questions, depending on how it works out. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so you should all have a copy of the timeline, hopefully, next in front of you. All right. So we had set aside March 18th and 19th for first round interviews. We need to determine several things. A, are these going to be virtual or in person? B, the times on those dates. We had set aside 6, 7, and 8 p.m. That obviously has changed since we have fewer candidates moving forward than we had scheduled for in the very beginning. So we need to figure that out. And then we also need to have a candid discussion about whether the interviews will be live streamed or recorded and played later. We want to make sure that none of the candidates see the questions before they're interviewed. As an example, if I'm interviewed first and Sheila's sitting off in the wings watching, then she comes in totally prepared, and that's not going to help you. So those are things that we need to discuss. So I don't know if we want to first decide virtual or in person. I think I know the answer to that one.
Trustee Ennis?
I would recommend in person.
I think, I'm seeing lots of heads shaking, so yes, I think we're gonna go with in person.
Okay, perfect. Do we want to do 2 interviews each day?
Trustee Blake?
I don't know if anybody, I know it makes a long night, but is there any way you can do like 6, 7, 8, 9, and just be done with it, knock it out in one night? Or
Well,
is that too much?
If you think you are going to be fresh for the 9 o'clock person,
I guess my preference is probably 6, 7, 8 on Monday, and then 6 o'clock on Tuesday, and then we discuss right after that.
I just think the second day person would be possibly advantaged, or
I do agree, that does kind of give them an advantage because they're the freshest in our minds if it's right before that discussion.
If you're to split it, I would say it's either 2 and 2 or all in 1. Do 3 and 1.
What is everyone's ability to do a 5 o'clock, 5, 6, 7, 8?
I personally agree with some of my colleagues in splitting it up. I want to feel like that I give each candidate the equitable time they need and my consideration. And, you know, as the evening goes on, you get a little tired. So I would recommend 2 and 2.
Others? I would suggest it's a 6 and a 7 o'clock interview then. Okay, I guess we're going to do 2 and 2, and a 6 o'clock and a 7 o'clock.
Okay, and then you'll meet virtually with me following the 7 o'clock interview on the 19th, and we will go through the scoring and discussion again, like we did tonight. Okay, and then what about live streaming or not live streaming, taping?
Trustee Alsbach?
I really think that we should tape it and release it later, because otherwise, the second night, people really have an advantage.
Other thoughts on that? I tend to agree.
Agreed.
Okay, so
Okay.
we will record it, but then it won't be released until probably Wednesday after those interviews.
Okay, so the district will take care of all of the technology for that.
Yeah, I'll have to check on the location. I'm not sure if that's been identified. Trustee Alsbach?
I do have a question about the 19th. Kathy, you said you'd be with us virtually after. Sheila, are you going to be here, or is anyone going to be here in person, or are we going to be left to our own devices in person?
She's gone. I mean, I can be here if you want me to be. It makes no difference to me. It's just, it's a cost to you, so it's entirely up to you. I won't be
Yeah,
in, I won't be in the
she would
schedule.
be joining us via Zoom, much like Scott does.
And we'd be doing that in open forum?
It's open session, yeah,
It's up to you.
I'm fine with doing it virtually.
yeah.
And then, Michelle, you'll provide me with the location of the interview so that I can let the candidates know. Okay, so the next thing we need to discuss, which I did not bring copies of, are formatting for the interviews on April 1st and 3rd for the finalists. Now, given that we are interviewing 4 people, maybe we won't cut down to 3, maybe we'll cut down to 2. I'm not thrilled with that, given the gaps in the timeline. I don't want you to lose good candidates because they select other positions. So regardless, what kind of format do you want? Do you want, just say 3. Just say we have 3 candidates, that way we're planning for the best case scenario. Do you want all 3 candidates to be in the district on the same day? And I think Michelle had given some examples, had emailed them to you of some various schedules other districts have put together with tours, community forum, the board interview. Some of them had writing samples. There were, I don't know what kind of forums you want. Do you just want a big forum? Do you want similar size? Do you want similar groups that what we had, stakeholder groups? The more groups you have, the bigger the schedule gets. And if you slam them all into one day, that's a lot. Do you want, maybe some groups from each of the geographic areas? I'm just throwing things out there. To see what sticks. But we need to figure out first the formatting from the standpoint of, do you want them all in one day? And then on the 3rd, the board would then do the deliberation? Or do you want to,
Okay, so I will say that I would prefer to interview all 3 on one day and come back on the 3rd for deliberation. That would be my personal preference, again, from the standpoint of them all being the freshest versus dividing them up, and then having an opportunity to hopefully take into account any feedback we receive from the community, as well as thinking about it ourselves and coming back on the 3rd to, deliberate and make a decision.
I had that in mind too, yeah.
Okay, so I think we are, hopefully we could do all 3 on one day. I think there were some, if you do a community forum, I I think there's some logistical issues with that. I know you had mentioned that one of the locations that you had done, the candidates or the applicants all came in and they were asked questions that community members had submitted, but they were recorded, and then that was released, and then the community could watch it and provide feedback on that.
Yeah, so the candidates were live. Anybody that wanted to be there, obviously, since it's Michigan, could be there live. The questions were submitted through SurveyMonkey, so we would have a SurveyMonkey link saying if you could suggest an interview question and have them select which group they identify with, kind of like the stakeholder survey, so we have something to go by. We give them a deadline to submit a question. We then go through those questions and try to put a wide variety together, keeping in mind what has already been asked so that we aren't redundant. And then there was a SurveyMonkey QR code, whatever you want to do, for people to provide feedback in response to how the candidates were. We try to keep it, it's easier probably for the participants or the people watching if we keep the results survey kind of like how did you feel them to be engaging? Were they personable? Kind of those characteristics or traits. We don't want to get too far in the weeds of, you know, how do you think they did at their other job? Because we don't have a clue. So we try to keep it, you know, kind of generic. But then if we did it that way, then the people that were there could get the QR code. The QR code and the link could be posted on the district website. Following probably the last interview on the 1st, they would have until maybe 3 o'clock on the 2nd or first thing on the 3rd to fill out that survey information, their feedback. I would put it all together and then give it to the board for you to review. You would have already interviewed the candidate, so you will interview the candidate on the 1st as well. That way you've already interviewed them. You can't read the feedback and get a preconceived opinion based on what the masses think. Because there are boards that are easily swayed by what people outside say, so we want you to interview them first and then read the feedback and then have discussion and a conversation. Does that make sense?
So what would that night of April 1st look like for a candidate? They would come in and be read a few questions from the community?
So,
And then ours?
no, they would be asked by us. We would moderate those sessions. So we'll have to figure out the schedule. If we're gonna have a candidate here in a session and we're gonna have a candidate here in a session, or if there's just one community forum, then, you know, then we ask the questions. That way there's no engagement, there's no back and forth with the community, so we're staying focused and on task. And that's, you know, partly what you're paying us for. And then the board interview would be whatever times it figures into the schedule. But the candidates would be here pretty much all day if they did tours. But again, it depends on what process you have them do. If you have them do a writing sample, then that takes time. If you have them meet with the district leadership team, that takes time. Again, a tour of some of the buildings, all of those things take time. It can be as detailed or as broad, I guess, as you want it to be with the groups. I just know that, you know, we frequently hear in stakeholder meetings, well, we'd like to have a voice. And so then you have how do you get that voice, you know?
And we definitely heard that when we talked with students, that they felt it was important that their voices be heard.
All right, so we need to come up with a game plan, because I think that we need potentially some work that needs to be done that is away from the board table to completely identify how this schedule is going to work. So I don't know if we want to identify the components, and then we can, because part of this has to obviously be put together with the administration and the district as well, because we need tours. We need to identify a space where we could have a community forum. We need to line up someone who can come and record that and post it. We need to identify you know, if we want to give them a writing prompt to write on. So I don't know, have you done it before where it's one community forum, but the candidates each come for like 30 minutes? So you have the same group that is able to?
Yeah, they would need to, the group would need to remain the same. They need to be committed to the process, otherwise your feedback is apples and orange as opposed to apples and apples. So whether you put a group together, maybe looking at your stakeholder schedule, maybe pick several people from each group that was invited before, get them committed, then you have your kind of your whole all-encompassing group, but they have to be committed to stay so that we can get honest feedback compared to all the candidates. I did have a district that they did that. They took some from each group and they had the people stay in the room, the candidates rotated out. But that district, they made people sign in, and if they left to go to the bathroom, they signed out, and then they had to sign back in. That was, they kept good control over it. But it seemed to work really well because they had people that made up all of the groups. It was a K-8 district, but still, they didn't have kids, but.
But we'd still have the opportunity to post that and allow people to record, you know.
Yes.
So even if the group that was there was not huge.
Correct.
We still have the opportunity for the
Yes, anybody
community to
can watch
provide
it.
feedback.
Yes, correct. Correct.
Okay, so I'm looking for thoughts. Trustee Alsbach?
So I'll just throw this out there and we'll see what the group thinks. I can Google their writing samples, and they're gonna have a communication department to help them craft the messages anyways. So I don't think it's that critical to have them sit down and write something right there, because we can find that out on the internet.
I agree with that. I think at this point, if really that they really can't write something, like, that would be found out well before the interview process. So I don't think that's value added. My question around the community forum, would it be possible just to do it more where all three of them are there at the same time and just asking the questions?
It can,
Because
but
if
it's
it's the
really.
same, if it's the same group, and again, if it's controlled, you would still get the apples to apple comparison. You actually get to see the candidates next to each other.
True, but candidate 3 is going to have heard the first 2 candidates answer the question and can change their answers accordingly.
Right. And so a practice you could use is basically you start with a different person each time. So the first person's not first every time. I just think that would be good for the community. One, they see it all at the same time. And again, there's ways to randomize it so that you start at one end, work down, then you start at 2, then you start at 3. So yeah, you all get the same advantage of eventually hearing the question, being the third person to answer. I just think that from an optics standpoint would be really beneficial for our community.
Have you seen that, and do the applicants have any issue with that?
The applicants really don't have much to say about it. It's not done very often. We have done it before, but we try to keep them as separated as we can. However, since it's Michigan, they're all going to know each other anyway, just because the interviews are, you know, their names are out, as opposed to a typical district where the names aren't released until they're finalists, so everybody's going to look everybody up. I
I would
agree, if that's the way you want to do it, I do agree with Andrew's thought that this person is asked question 1 first,
Yeah.
and they're round robin or whatever.
Well, from a scheduling standpoint, that makes it easier, because then all 3 are in one place at one time.
Do you have a big venue? Like, do you have a big auditorium?
Auditoriums, I mean. There's 3 auditoriums that hold approximately 350 people, 400 people, something like that, I think.
I'm in favor of that approach. I think it's engaging for everyone, and it also would allow everybody to kind of compare everybody's answers and stuff too. And when you do it where you just start the question and just keep going down the line, so
Okay.
it makes it fair, I think.
So I just
I'm
want to
sorry.
make, no, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make sure I'm following this. So the person's going to come to the district sometime early in the day. They're going to get some kind of a tour. They're going to be separated to. And then at some point, like probably in the afternoon or later in the afternoon, they're going to have the community forum where they're answering all these questions. And then that night, they're going to answer the questions here. Okay.
Unless you can juggle the schedule so that, maybe one candidate is interviewed in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. I know, I
But then
get
that
it.
person is much fresher in the morning.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a long day.
Well, and if you only have one forum, then their day perhaps wouldn't have to start so early either. You know, maybe they could start at, instead of 8 AM, they could start at, I don't know, 11, because you're probably not going to want to do the forum until after work. Maybe?
I don't think that's going to be possible, because if we're starting the interviews at
Interviews.
6, I mean, I think we need to have a dinner in there for them. But more than likely, the people who are at 7 and 8 are just going to be, you know, sitting
In
around,
a green room?
right? Yes, with no electronic devices.
Yes, with no electronic devices.
Okay, so. Trustee Gupta?
I might be the only one who's feeling this way, but I would really benefit from like a visual schedule of
Oh,
what
yeah.
this day is, like to help help
sure.
me have this conversation better. And
Do you mean like what our schedule is,
yeah,
or?
like what that day is going to look like
Oh,
for
yeah, we'll
our
put one together.
candidates.
Yeah, there's some really nifty, pretty
I'm trying to
colored
put it all
charted-
together in my head and think it through, but it's hard
Oh,
without
yeah.
a visual.
But you saw the ones that were sent out.
Yeah, I did,
Okay.
but it's, I did, but we're talking about a lot more detail now, so I'm trying to fit that into the puzzle and the forums, and, you know, things that we hadn't decided on yet, so.
How big is your leadership team? 10?
I think it's like
Ish.
12 on cabinet, something like that.
I would probably encourage a session with cabinet members.
That's why I wonder if having the community forum where they rotate through would be better, because they could go through a 3-session, you know, I'm picturing like this 3-session matrix where one session is with the leadership team, one session is with the community, and one session is the interview with us. And if we have 3 people and we have 3 blocks of time, you know, think about it just like a schedule. Now, the community members all stay in their class as their candidates rotate through the leadership. And, you know, I think we have the high school facilities where we could use the auditorium, the media center, and then we usually have at least one other room that could be available.
There will only be 2 of us, though. There will not be 3 of us. There will only be 2 of us.
But there might not, if we're talking about cabinet being one of them, I'm not sure that that we would need someone from Ray and Associates for that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's different ways. Are they going to ask the candidate questions and then provide feedback? Or is it just going to be more of a conversation? Hey, what do you do in your day? What's your role? You know, that kind of thing. So there's different ways to do it. I would certainly encourage the leadership team to come to the forum, because then they could provide feedback that way as well. It just depends on what you're looking for feedback.
And we could talk to cabinet as well. Well, I guess that means they are not at the actual interview then. I mean, they could watch it later. But I just wondered, you know, while they're not at the interview, are they talking to cabinet?
So that was going to be the point I was going to make. The rotation, I wouldn't think the interview would be part of the rotation, because I think we do want to make sure that that's almost separate to itself, make sure anyone from the cabinet that wants to be there, you know, that really should, I think, be on and off to itself. So if we're talking about rotation, you're talking about 2 events versus 3.
So you did a community forum and the leadership, the same as a rotation, and then the interviews would be a dedicated time slot in the evening?
The interviews would be a dedicated time slot in the evening. I still like the community forum as one. So I think it's more just trying to figure how to figure in the cabinet piece of it, and almost you kind of mentioned maybe the cabinet can come and give their feedback. I don't know. To me, the value of that piece to the community, seeing just the answers, being able to see it side by side. I just think where our community's at, that's just a good opportunity really to set the kind of the tone for everything. Maybe to the point, is the cabinet meeting, especially if it's not one that's going to be really facilitated, is it really that value added? Again, there are, you know, and I'm asking that as a question, I just don't know. Again, if that meeting is really truly going to be a super value added one, especially if it's not a format that we get feedback from them,
Well, I would tell you as a cabinet member, I would want to have an interaction. I think it would go a long way to building whoever the candidate we select. It would go a long way to building their relationship.
Can they be part of the tour? So that it's more of a casual, just, the cabinet leads the tour and we split them up in.
But you'd have to split it up, so, but the issue would be that, if you were a cabinet member, you'd have an opportunity to meet one, but not all three. And I think you were talking about when they fill out the survey, they would identify who they were, so there could be a cabinet
There could be a
piece
cabinet, correct.
to provide, so we would get that feedback from, kind of cabinet as a whole of, where their thoughts fell. How does everyone feel if I take into, I'm hearing, community forum, all three at one, they need a tour, maybe meeting with cabinet. What if I meet with administration and try to come up with some thoughts on, how to fit that in? And then I could just send that out and individuals can provide feedback on that.
That sounds great.
Go with that.
So I'm still concerned about having all three of them at one community forum, because I feel like we're putting these people into a debate, which is good for us to vet the people like kind of against each, it's like a, but I don't know, I don't know how, that's a big hurdle to jump. Do you really, do we do this often in superintendent searches? I
Typically.
haven't heard of it before, so like, you're putting these people into a debate.
But I guess I'm
fun.
going to say I don't see it as a debate because, one, the questions are
Facilitated.
already identified and they're being asked by
Yeah.
Ray and Associates versus, but, I'm open to hearing, but I just don't see it being a debate. Trustee Annis?
I just want to also factor in, we're talking about cabinet, but we also should be factoring in our teaching staff and our other staff that I'm sure would want to also, have an opportunity to see these candidates before, we go into the next round of interviews.
Yeah, I guess what I foresee is that community forum, even if you can't be there in person, you'll be able to watch it, the video of it later, so that anyone in the community could see the responses and reply to that survey to provide feedback. Because I don't see how we would be able to, on one day, be able to have something where all teachers could meet each one. I just don't.
I guess what I'm saying, the point I'm trying to make is whatever form the community forum is, make it at a time in which our teaching staff and the rest of our staff can participate if they so choose.
That would have to be after 4 something. And then how do you get dinner in there prior to a 6 o'clock interview?
So I would say.
Push back the interviews.
To 7, 8, 9?
So but my thought is, though, if we're saying people are submitting their questions ahead of time, the time in which the forum's at really shouldn't make much of a difference. So again, any teacher, anyone from our staff can submit their question and get their question asked, and then obviously it's recorded. They can see the answer to their question, because again, no one's they're actually asking the questions themselves, so they don't physically need to be there. I think more to your point, President Patel, I think if we really just say the guidelines, I really think as much as we can make the tours, and I think say it's not going to be all, it's not going to be everybody, but really try to make the tours as much as possible, that they have stops where whatever buildings are in, that the staff gets to speak to them. Again, there's no way that we're going to be able to say we're going to hit everybody, but if we're just clear on what the tour path is or what they're going to, and we're going to try and make sure that whatever buildings are in, they have that opportunity, I think that really can be kind of almost like the two things. One really is, how do we make them available to as much of our staff as possible through the tours, and what's that look like from an efficiency standpoint? And then the quote-unquote community forum is really as many questions as possible in that setting where it's, they can all see it in one. I think we could build, I think our teams could build that into what it needs to be. If we just kind of focus on those two quote-unquote events or structures and build to that.
I would encourage tours for each of the candidates, elementary, middle school, high school, for sure. I would also, obviously, the principals in those schools would then kind of shepherd the candidate around along with whoever else you have of the
And a
admin
student.
team. Yeah, and then I would certainly have them engage with some students, maybe pop into a classroom or two. Especially the littles, they really like having somebody big and important come in. I know I did a search last year where I had one of the finalists go into a classroom and he walked out and he said that teacher is not teaching that the way it's supposed to be taught. Because he was a teacher in his own right back in, and he said this is, and everybody does things different, but it was interesting because then you see how they are. Do they get down? Do they see what the kids are doing? And obviously that's more of an elementary school thing than a middle school or high school if you have student leaders from the schools, but I would certainly not just have them be the student leaders. There are so many kiddos that want to have a voice that aren't on the student council or whatever that should be made to feel special in some way, a part of this process as well. So I think that, all three schools, grade levels, having them go into classrooms, allow as much time as you need to get transported from point A to point B with the driver, that kind of thing. But yeah. And then we need to figure out how long you want the forum to be. And the board interviews as well.
Yeah, what do you guys think about that? I mean, is it an hour? Originally I was thinking 30 minutes per person, so is it 90 minutes? Is it, for the community forum? You're looking for people who will be able to be there for the whole thing. Yeah, Trustee Gupta?
I mean, I think an hour is good. I don't know, what does everyone else think?
Okay, what else do we have that,
Okay, so we're gonna get a schedule. Sorry, we're gonna get a schedule put together. I will put a survey sample together to get questions from the groups. I think the survey for the 31 quality said administrators, teachers, support staff. So is administrators okay, or do you want it to say cabinet members? Or do you want a separate one for cabinet members?
I think if we end up having a time when cabinet meets, I think it would be good to have a separate cabinet
Okay,
piece. So I'll
Okay.
know more about that after I meet with the administration on scheduling.
okay. And I will work on a sample survey for feedback. I think.
Now, you had provided one, right?
I did. I did not bring copies. And that one is kind of generic, like I said. Which group do you identify with? So they would have to select who they, administrator, cabinet, whatever. And then each of the candidates' names would be listed. So they're going to have to take the survey more than once, depending on how many finalists there are. And this one says candidate exhibited a high level of professionalism. And so they were ranked as, or the options were strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. Exhibited great interpersonal skills and characteristics. Had a sufficient amount of educational experience, sufficient amount of administrative experience, was able to motivate, connect with participants, exhibited communication skills and was clearly able to project their responses, remained comfortable and at ease, addressing stakeholders in attendance, demonstrated confidence in their ability to lead our district, demonstrated excellent knowledge of instruction and curriculum. Candidate understands, is committed to, and has the capacity to bring the district a culture and practice of student, staff, and community inclusion, equity, and elimination of biases. And then overall, you feel this candidate would make an excellent superintendent, and then they had a place for comments. Now, this was put together by a district that had they were severely lacking communication. And so you can kind of tell from these things that it was all based on how the candidates engaged with the group, and if the group felt that they were being heard and absorbing. So theirs was kind of based on communication, but I think we need to keep them kind of general like that, because if you get too in-depth, then it gets muddy. So that's just a suggestion from another district. And they can be changed if you want to. I'll just put one together with this, and if you want to change them, they can be. So I guess the last thing for me is, so the interviews are on April 1st. First round interviews, March 18th, 19th, and then you're off the following week. So when would you like some sample second round interview questions? I don't want to inundate your minds right now for fear that they'll blow up. But the first round are pretty much done. Do you want me to send them so that you can take a look at them next week at your leisure? And then we can kind of be in a spot where they're maybe put together pretty closely before you go on break? Yes? Okay,
Yeah, I think that would be,
okay. I can do that.
because I mean, I'm actually wondering if when we, on that March 19th, when we are choosing who to move on, that maybe we can finalize those questions as well.
Perfect. So these are just going to be our stock questions, and I think that there was a couple that we pulled off tonight that I will put on. But you can certainly, if there's something, and I know that there was a question that was important to somebody that didn't make it, if there's something like that, we can always add. We're not telling you the questions to ask. We're just kind of giving you something to start with, so you're not looking at a blank piece of paper.
What if, if board members had potential questions that, says you were going to get them to us by the end of this week, is that what you said?
Oh, yeah, I should be able to get them to you Wednesday when I get back.
But I just wondered if we asked board members, like, if you just have, not that we can't add or change them later, but if you had some already in mind, to provide them to you by Wednesday so that they could be included to everyone in that first round.
Okay. Perfect. And then were we anticipating an hour and 15 minutes for the board interview for the last candidates?
I was thinking an hour.
An hour? Okay.
Yeah, because like I said, I think we're like 6, 7, 8.
Okay.
But so maybe it is 6 to 7, 7:15, just pushes it
Yep,
back.
I'll put a little break in the middle. Okay, perfect. Okay. Uh-oh, somebody's got his hand up.
Trustee Blake.
I don't want to go backwards, but I am a little bit. I'm a little worried that we have 4 people and we're trying to get through 2 rounds without slippage and still end up with 3 at the very end. I'm just wondering if we want to say, like, if one of these people doesn't, I know there's a big gap in the scores, but if one of these people doesn't accept, that maybe we'll put the next person in line, because it's very easily that one of these people at some point drops out, and then we have 3 for our first round. We might as well make it the final round at that point.
Jason, I don't disagree with you from the standpoint, we know that even when we have applicants for board positions, we've had, we've selected people and then they have dropped out between then and the interview. And I'll also say that, sometimes our initial review of just paper or little snippets can be misleading as well. I know I've been on interviews where someone has been my last choice, but then when you meet them in person, it's a completely different story. So how does the rest of the board feel about adding that 5th individual to be included if any of these 4 candidates drop out?
I personally wouldn't support it. I think, again, the numbers kind of support, there's that clear break. If we ended up from the first round and second round losing 1, and we still end up with 2 people, they would still be amongst the ones that were the higher ranked. In worst case scenario, to that point, if we go through the interview process and to your point, maybe it goes the opposite way. They look good on paper, but they don't interview as well. We're still going to make the decision. So in my mind, we're trying to select the best candidate. To go back and just say we're going to throw someone else on the list that, from this, just looking at the numbers that we have in front of us, says there's a clear distinction between what the majority or what the scorers say is this echelon, or where we think they're the good fits, or we think they're ideal candidates to interview. I think just say, hey, we're just going to toss another one on in case someone comes out. It just sends a bad message.
Anyone else? Trustee Gupta?
Yeah, I would agree with Trustee Blake on this, that I think if we're following our scores, and this is the next person on our scoring, it's a good idea to include them just in case we do have people drop out. We have some other candidates. I am curious to hear your input on this.
I was just going to say, I totally understand where everybody's coming from, but then you're leaving this candidate hanging for 2 weeks. We can't tell this person, yes, you're moving forward, and we can't tell them, no, you're not.
I would support what we initially agreed on.
Yeah, I guess I was.
That's fine, I just wanted to raise it because I'm just looking and it's, okay, if that's what you want to do.
All right. Have we addressed everything else?
Yes.
All right. Yep. So, yep. Yeah,
Candidate legend back.
they're sending them down here.
Okay.
Then at this point, I'm going to move on to public comment. I don't have any right now. Is there anyone who wished to make public comment that did not fill out a form? All right. So with that then, I think if there is no objection, I guess I will say, we do have a meeting on March 11th. It is here. That is a regular board meeting. And otherwise, if there's no objection, we will adjourn at hold on, I can't get a time here, 8:58 PM. Okay, 8:58 PM. All right, thank you everyone for coming, appreciate it. Have a good night.